Good morning, everybody. Just wanted to welcome everybody to the second of our events around the analysis and research that we've done on corporate websites. This session today is focused on meeting the needs of our sustainability audiences. What I would like to do is just introduce the speakers that we've got today. So first of all, myself, Richard. Hi, everybody. I'm Chief Digital Officer at Black Sun, so I look after all of the work that goes out from a digital perspective here. We are joined by Leighton. Leighton, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Leighton. I'm Sustainability Communications Director. I spend most of my time working with clients on developing their sustainability stories, narratives, and engaging communications.
Great, thanks, Leighton. And Dan?
Hi guys, Head of Digital Strategy at Black Sun. So responsible for really understanding what the stakeholder needs are, driving towards telling that corporate story, the value creation story, and really thinking about how we can enhance that through things like functionality, content, and user experience.
Brilliant, thanks guys. So on our agenda today, firstly I'll just do a bit of an intro into Black Sun because some of you may not be familiar with us. Promise that'll be really short and to the point. Dan will then describe a little bit around the Web 100, types of things we look for and the things that we assess, particularly obviously with a sustainability lens for today. Both Leighton and Dan will then walk through some of the trends that we found in our analysis, what we're seeing in terms of best practice examples and so on, to really just help you, continue to enhance your sustainability narrative and section through the website. And you can join the conversation either through social media, and also there is a little QR code there that will take you to a summary page of our findings on the Web 100. For those attending, of course, we will share the presentation, so you don't need to take huge numbers of notes. But again, that is a useful resource on the website, which just has some of the nuggets that we've shared with you today, and of course in the previous session. So just go there and find the information. Just a little bit of a recap on Black Sun. We are a stakeholder communications company, so we really help organizations better connect, engage, and communicate with different stakeholder groups. And if you like, there are three principal areas that we operate in. There's kind of investor communications and the overall kind of corporate reporting and narrative. There's sustainability communications, which Leighton will cover in a little bit more detail in a while. And of course, there is digital transformation, which includes corporate sites, stakeholder microsites, and so on. So from a digital perspective, we offer a complete range of services from consultancy, home to Dan's great offices, around benchmarking, understanding user needs, developing communications and content strategy, and of course, reporting and analytics, through experience and content production and design, and of course, ongoing support for those sites that we look after for our clients. So in terms of our tapestry of work, clearly corporate websites and sustainability sites and areas within those sites are key to what we do. Seeing a couple of examples there on screen, one being Coca-Cola Hellenic, and the other being Kingfisher, who we just relaunched their responsible business section for recently. We also provide user experience and content advice. So this is work that we've done led by Dan and the team on Imperial Brands. Both for their sustainability section and how they communicate some of their strategic pillars, ESG issues, and so on. And we also deliver campaigns, sustainability campaigns. So this is a campaign that we did for Stop Food Waste Day, which is really around helping people commit to reducing overall food waste. And it's part of the communications program that we deliver for Compass Group. Leighton, do you want to just recap very briefly our sustainability service and a couple of things that we do?
Yeah, so there's an awful lot of things that end up getting bucketed into three categories there. We begin always through our research and insight, which is understanding the needs of our clients, understanding the needs of their stakeholders, and then figuring out how we want to progress with telling their story and relaying their performance. This includes things like materiality assessments, stakeholder engagement exercises, working with raters and rankers to understand what their needs are and what they would like to see companies doing differently, and carrying out gap analyses, looking at what companies are currently doing, look at what they should be doing, and help work out plans for filling the gap and improving their performance and the processes that support that. Once we've got that insight, the building blocks that we need before going into storytelling, we work on building up narratives and key messaging, helping companies position themselves and differentiate themselves through their stories. That ultimately then ends in engaging communications, whether that be websites, whether that be social media campaigns, print, posters, any number of possible ways of communicating in print and digital. That's the final piece. So it's these three pillars that in essence make up our sustainability proposition.
Great. There are some couple of examples here on the Leighton in terms of some of the work we've done with Tesco's and the like.
Yeah, I'll come on to Tesco's again later, particularly on the fact sheets. But we worked this year with Tesco's in really sort of helping change the way they talk to their stakeholders through previously having had one very long sustainability report, not very much on the website, and a set of documents that we didn't quite feel spoke to the stakeholders in the most efficient way. We worked out a different way to position the key information to make it more stakeholder focused. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in terms of what we're seeing some clients doing. And in terms of materiality assessment, just very briefly for the non-sustainability experts, materiality assessment is helping companies identify the issues that their stakeholders and the business itself needs to be talking about and finding the most effective ways to communicate. We undertook a large exercise with South 32, an Australian mining company, doing lots of interviews, lots of focus groups, lots of desk research, social, digital listening, and came up with a set of key issues and their key priority areas. We then used that to recraft their narrative to build a new sustainability framework, to build new positioning around sustainability for effective storytelling, and that'll be coming out very soon.
Great, thanks, Leighton. And well, that's enough about us. What I'll do now is hand over to Dan. Dan, do you want to just take us through the Web 100, you know, kind of a bit of its history and kind of things we look for? That'd be great. Thank you.
No worries, Rich. So I guess the first thing to say for those maybe a little less uninitiated in terms of our research, so this is the 7th year that we've been doing this. And what we're looking for is essentially best practice across content and user experience. So really understanding what drives the marketplace in terms of, you know, best practice. And that means that we can leverage our understanding to help our clients to improve their sites. And that's part of what Rich was alluding to earlier in terms of the role that I play. But how we get there is we're looking at over 200 metrics on the site. So we're thinking about what good looks like and using a funnel for not just saying, you know, does it have X, Y, and Z, but actually, is there transparency? Is it bringing it to life? Is it using rich media? And beyond then asking our own questions, we're using a huge amount of other resources in terms of then, you know, what best practice looks like, right through from things like the ICO regulations. You may have heard, obviously, the cookie disclaimer regulations is just one facet of what they do, through to government, the FRC, thinking about analytics, the user flows, right through to the work we've been doing recently with the IR Society as well. So it really is an ecosystem that we draw on in terms of best practice and understanding what that looks like. I mentioned earlier around kind of content and experience. So there's two kind of, you know, the key areas. So when we're talking about content, as you'd expect, aligned with very much the structure of a corporate site, and sustainability being the focus today. And when we're thinking about experience, it's really thinking about how easy it is to navigate. You know, is it easy to find content? Is there good use of taxonomy? And obviously then creatively, does it engage with audiences as well in terms of the what we're saying and how we're saying it? We looked at the analytics, I touched on this, and really kind of understanding what the audiences are viewing has been a really interesting kind of exercise for us. So we were looking predominantly across all of the sites that we run in terms of, you know, what content they're looking for, what search terms are being used, and then obviously the visitor profile. And what we discovered was that actually, from a sustainability point of view, that actually, you know, the users are more likely to spend longer on the site. You'll see from the green dot there that you know, the longevity on the site is, you know, some 30 seconds above, you know, a careers audience on average. Now, but they're also maybe less inclined to click around in terms of pages per session. So that might indicate that they are looking for quick kind of content. I know that's something Leighton talks a lot about in terms of those that want deep dive versus quick. And therefore, maybe they're downloading data sheets or they're looking at, you know, reports. But again, engaging audiences in different ways is a really important kind of understanding of what this means for different users. And we really only have one opportunity to engage with them quickly and efficiently before they might be off and looking at kind of other areas on the site. We also looked at search terms, and there's not a huge amount of surprise here when you're looking from a sustainability angle that, you know, people are looking for, you know, zero emissions, or they're looking for, you know, sustainability or even things around COVID. But what was interesting for us is the angle around looking for things like culture. because actually it shows as a business that there's an understanding that it goes beyond just what you're reporting on, and it's actually intrinsic to who you are as an organization to understand firstly what audiences want, and also then how that manifests itself in terms of content that we're seeing online. So again, a really interesting kind of exercise in terms of finding out what users are really looking for in terms of the topics, and obviously then beyond that in terms of the content that they're looking for.
Cool, thanks, Dan. That's great. It was good to see how we can use analytics as well to inform the decisions that we make around the structure and content of the site. And I think that's really what we how we came up with this year's theme, because overall, the last session, what we saw overall for corporate sites was much more kind of purpose-led communications, purpose-led content and narrative through the site. Hence, how well does your website serve your purpose? And it's interesting, really, what we're starting to see in terms of the themes under the sustainability area of the site. So what we're saying, and there's three key takeaways. The first is actually a much stronger narrative across the whole sustainability journey. We'll come on to that in a second. Secondly, much more commitment in terms of leadership, in terms of introductions and statements of intent. And thirdly, improved and enhanced reporting in terms of access to data and content and news and so on. So the first of these is really focused on creating a really strong narrative of sustainability stranding across the whole site, because we know from what Dan was just saying that sustainability appeals to all of the different stakeholder groups. So Leighton, do you want to just take us through some of the findings that we had in terms of the narrative area?
Yeah, I mean, so what I'll say on narrative to start with is we work probably more now in helping companies developing their sustainability narrative and the key messaging and the proof points around that than ever before. And really, it highlights the importance of a company's ability to be able to present its sustainability credentials as part of its corporate identity. If you go to most companies' LinkedIn sites or any social media presence that they have, you'll find they probably spend more time talking about their sustainability initiatives and programs than they do about their brands or their acquisitions or their share price or their dividends. That certainly wasn't true 10 or 15 years ago. And it just shows this kind of proliferation and growth of the need for companies to not necessarily be the best at telling the story, but to really differentiate the story they're telling. And that's where we spend a lot of our time working with clients, is on finding that differentiated but appealing and engaging story around sustainability. Looking at the top 100, 96% of them, pleased to say, talk about sustainability, give an overview about their approach to sustainability. 69 go further and talk about the impact that they have on the planet and on society as a result of their operations and vis-a-vis sustainability. 41 of them talk about their material issues, which is really important. That the disclosure of materiality processes and the material issues is the way that you distance yourself from greenwashing. It's the proof points you need to say, we're not cherry picking the issues we're going to talk about. We've been through a thorough process. We know we need to address climate. We need to address biodiversity. We need to address waste, whatever the subject is. You've got there through a rigorous process and not just cherry pick things that suited your narrative. So we've seen a large increase of companies who are disclosing on this, and a lot of the materiality process then goes on into how a company defines itself. So you'll often see the people, planet, society pillars of sustainability strategies. These come from the fact that there's a lot of work being done to determine the very granular issues that companies must face, and they roll up into strategic frameworks. This is something that's growing now for companies how they disclose, for what they're doing, and fills a lot of the time that we spend with our clients working on this process.
Great, thanks, Leighton. And Dan, do you want to take us through some examples of that kind of narrative, just so people can see what good looks like?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So let me show you websites as they should be, rather than just on the screen in terms of screen grabs. But just wanted to kind of take you through a few examples. You'll see here in terms of the BASF, so really showcasing sustainability front and center on the homepage. So they're talking all around their campaign around the plastics journey. Interestingly, from their side of things, what they do is they integrate, a number of different kind of facets in terms of bringing it to life with just a little iconography. The ability to obviously navigate through. They're showcasing obviously the campaign in terms of make, use, and recycle. But fundamentally, it's creating a narrative right from the get-go when you're landing on the site. So here you're finding out all about their sustainability drivers. So as a global organization, that is their focus in terms of what they're trying to do. They're creating a discussion as well in terms of, you know, with the hashtag and obviously linking that through to social. And they're also then linking it into things around the elements of kind of, you know, the discover more around different news items and everything else. And interestingly, from their side of things, you know, we've mentioned this on our previous sessions, when we're looking at it from a, you know, a sustainability point of view, and we're thinking about how they can integrate the content on this. As we navigate through, you'll see here that we create chemistry for a sustainable future. They're focusing very much around their, you know, purpose in terms of creating chemistry as well, and how we create value. So very much aligned with that kind of narrative. And interestingly, from their side of things, what they're also then doing is, if we navigate them back within the media section, we're also then aligning that in terms of then how that can be brought to life through news items and different things that are sustainability focused as well. If we go to Lancet, again, the narrative right from the get-go on the site is talking around sustainability. So ambient video, obviously, in terms of, you know, showcasing a little bit of movement. Let's talk sustainability. I'm immediately engaged in that in terms of on the homepage. And when they're looking at it, they're also integrating different things around insights, different things around kind of, you know, incorporating key messages, and interestingly, really kind of showcasing how that can be led in terms of the stakeholder narrative. And when we're navigating through the sustainability section, you'll see an overview in terms of the strategy, but also showcasing things like commitments, opportunities, and then when you're drilling down into things like stakeholders, again, aligning with the vision, thinking about how they can bring that to life. And interestingly here, they're talking about, you know, the different areas, customers, for example, and engagement in action. Now, I would like them to go a little bit further. I think they could add in, you know, examples, and they start to a little bit further down the page when you can then start seeing how engagement in action is working with communities. So again, I can link through, but again, it isn't quite as clear cut as maybe it could be. If we look at another example of Bosch, so again, this is their sustainability section in terms of how they bring their strategies to life. And what they're doing, obviously a nice little narrative on the page as you kind of scroll down, using things like facts and figures, downloads, and different elements. But they help also bring it to life through the use of stories. So beyond obviously having some nice interactions with the images, the videos, and obviously then creating their, you know, sustainability goals for 2025. And then as we scroll down through these sections, you'll see in terms of the stories element, and then the ability to then drill down into all of these different things. They're talking around it from an innovation point of view. They're talking about it from a climate kind of point of view. So again, these are proof points that you can then drill down into, and helps that transparency and bring the content to life. Sembcorp are an energy organisation based over in Singapore, and again, they do this really nicely with showcasing different stories on the homepage, again, thinking about the sustainability presence. And beyond that, then they've got their climate and action plan. So very much text-based in terms of how they're bringing it to life, but they're using little infographics in terms of then showcasing the different data. And again, thinking about how that relates back to SDGs and different things. And the nice thing about this is you're on a little bit of a journey with them in terms of, you know, how this narrative is working and how you then understand exactly how the business is performing. And then you can immediately then go through to the next section at the bottom of the page and immediately continue on the reading. A couple more examples in this section just to showcase to you. So Compass Group, one of our own, again, their strategy page within ESG and sustainability is a really interesting kind of diversification of what's important, aligned with what we were just talking about. And thinking about the materiality analysis. So, you know, showcasing obviously their priorities, bring it to life with a little kind of visualization. Again, this aligns with those 41% that we were just talking about a bit later a moment ago. And again, linking that back to other areas of the site. So, you know, again, hungry for more information. I go a little bit further in terms of the sustainability management with a little bit more detail, but again, a similar kind of approach in terms of the management and governance, thinking about how it relates to their business practices and codes of conduct. And again, if I was to be kind of, you know, a little bit kind of reviewing this site, I would say that, you know, a lot of the content is hidden in this little accordion. I click on it and actually I'm striked by a lot more information around the different stakeholder groups, and obviously then the materiality analysis itself. So again, that could be displayed maybe a little bit better, but again, the content is really strong. And the final example is through CCH. So again, materiality issues front and center, showcasing them in a really nice, engaging way as we kind of move down the page. But then beyond that, you've got things like their ESG performance tracker and bringing it to life through the materiality assessments. And beyond that, in terms of how they're engaging with stakeholders, and then thinking about how that relates to things like their SDGs as well. And again, a really nice narrative-based kind of content showcasing what they're doing in terms of capital impact valuation studies as well. So again, showcasing data in a really nice, engaging way.
Great, thanks Dan, thanks Leighton. So I think what we've seen in that initial section is really, as I say, kind of a stronger narrative. So what we mean by that is really communicating thoroughly the overall approach to sustainability, communicating how they've gone through assessing and determining the material issues, and trying to communicate some of the outcomes and case studies of the work that's been done as a result of the whole strategy. So I think that's kind of the theme one. If you've got any questions, do feel free to pop them in the messages below. We can take them as we go through, or we'll have a little Q&A at the end of it. So do feel free to, if you have anything you wish to ask the guys. So let's talk a little bit then about committed leadership. So Leighton, what are we seeing in terms of that trend within websites these days?
So I'll start with a bit of story on committed leadership. I talk to investors quite a lot and ask them what metrics they use, what barometers they use to gauge a company's performance, and commitment and strategy more often. And talking to one last year who said, I meet with the CEO and I look him in the whites of his eyes and listen when he talks about sustainability. And if he looks like he knows what he's talking about, he talks with passion and he talks with accuracy, that gives me more confidence than all the MSCIs and Sustainalytics and other tools put together. So while of course I'm not downplaying the use of metrics and data is incredibly important, investors are looking for this commitment from their leadership. We've seen a huge growth, almost doubling over 2 years in terms of how companies are showing their commitment through the board and through governance mechanisms on sustainability. On the next slide, we see that almost half of companies now are giving a clear description of how their board are addressing sustainability issues. Some of this is being driven by legislation, but even the quality and the disclosure and the level of disclosure is increasing hugely. 35% introduced a sustainability committee. I don't think 35 would have had a sustainability committee even a couple of years ago. Now that they're actually formally being introduced and often being described what the function of the sustainability committee is, what their goals are, even linking things to remuneration. So there's an awful lot of movement in terms of leadership and governance, and then listing out who the sustainability committee members are and whether they are internal worker employees or whether they are non-executive directors or a mix of both. So really the importance of this from the investment community is increasing greatly, and naturally companies are responding accordingly.
Great, thanks Leighton.
So let's show a couple more examples of this as we kind of go through. So the first one to just showcase is Daimler. And interestingly, Leighton was just mentioning there a moment ago in terms of how, sustainability obviously showcased from a governance point of view, thinking about obviously the sustainability board. And this is introducing a nice little Q&A. So they've got their group sustainability board. They've got obviously specific objectives. And these two kind of members of it are literally kind of answering very kind of key questions around what's the significance of sustainability for Daimler? What in terms of anchoring it as part of the business, obviously in terms of then the goals and what they're trying to achieve. It then integrates things around the content as well, and then links you off, interestingly, to other kind of key areas such as ambition and everything else. So it's a really nice way of segueing users to really understand, firstly, what the business's priorities are, and obviously then give it that gravitas, as they was alluding to, in terms of how that then manifests itself. Mondi scores really highly across the board for sustainability, and their governance is a really nice example of showcasing from a governance framework. So again, outlining how the board fits with the wider kind of communications requirements around governance, and thinking about how that framework fits in. So, thinking about the Sustainability Development Committee, and then beyond that in terms of, the processes that oversee all of the issues in terms of the group function and beyond. And then we've got Allianz. So, this is a good detailed description of how to embed, sustainability and thinking about, that governance piece right from the get-go in terms of their approach. So thinking about obviously sustainability, showcasing this as Chief Sustainability Officer front and center with a nice little quote about the importance of it, how they're then living through the commitments, that strategy. And then beyond that, obviously then showcasing all of the different areas of what they're kind of focusing on around ESG. And then it's how to embed sustainability. So this is, again, a really nice kind of way of showcasing, obviously, how the Sustainability Committee are working, the members of the ESG board in terms of, being established, And again, to Leighton's point, established only 9 years ago in terms of how that's transitioned within the business. And again, you can then discover more about the different members of the team. But again, that's on their main kind of approach to sustainability. And again, they're showcasing how it's being kind of led from a governance point of view right across the ESG boards.
Great, thanks, Dan. So I think what we've seen in that section we've outlined is, first of all, a much greater commitment and direct commitment from the board towards sustainability, being clear around what the oversight is, how the committees run, who's involved, and so on. Just before we move on to the next section, Leighton, there's a great question in the chat from Jane. Thanks, Jane, for the question. Asking about how often we think a company should conduct a materiality assessment. Should we answer that now as we've just covered that topic?
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of opinions on it. Well, I know there are a lot of opinions on it. I think good practice and probably some of the sustainability standards say every other year with a refresh in the intermediate year. And I think I probably agree with that broadly. I think given the ever-changing world we're in, the year that you carry out the review and refresh, I think that refresh needs to be more than just a cursory finger in the air. I think that changed. I think there needs to be a little bit more rigor in the sort of off-year refresh. But I do think every other year is probably for a full assessment is reasonable. When we carry these out, we often get faced from the client that the challenge is, well, you won't find anything we don't already know about. And we found 2 to 3 years, where it's been 2 to 3 years since the last, we very often do, and the client buys into it afterwards. So I think every other year with a refresh in the middle, but that refresh needs to have a bit more rigor to it in the days of coronavirus and deforestation activism than perhaps it did 5 years ago.
Great, thanks, Leighton. And in terms of that point made around sustainability performance executive REM, do you want to make a point around that?
It's growing and it's being asked for by investors, and some companies are doing it very well, particularly in health and safety. A lot of BP for a long time have been doing health and safety. More and more are being set environmental targets. I think what the investment community want to understand is that the targets are stretched, and that they're being fairly implemented, and they're not just a lip service of ridiculously low bar that everyone's going to meet and get their bonus. Having read a lot of sustainability reports, annual reports as part of what I do every day, I've seen everything from really well done, and I have a genuine feel that they are remunerated based on their performance in sustainability, and they will be penalized if they don't do a good job, right through to just token gestures, just sort of pure tokenism. So it's definitely emerging. I'm hearing from the investors they want to see more of it, and as the people who own the companies, that makes it very important, and I think it's going to continue to grow.
That's probably driving quite a lot of the dynamic that we've seen today then, isn't it, in terms of being really clear around the kind of approach and the overall narrative, leading it from the top and being really clear about how we're doing the oversight and communicating that effectively through the website. And I guess that leads nicely onto this next area around the kind of enhanced reporting and what we're seeing in terms of the improved access to information, data, and so on. So do you want to take us through the next kind of set of findings?
Yeah, so I guess sustainability reporting has been it's changed so much. I think in the last 7 years, I've gone from advising clients who do no report to doing one report, sustainability report, to doing 2 sustainability reports, back to 1, and then to 0. But actually, in a justified way. Companies now recognize there's not a one-stop shop for presenting sustainability approach and performance. The old, let's dish out a 90-page sustainability report that covers everybody and every fact and every figure and every case study, and they'll find their way through it, just doesn't work anymore. And in a world where we've got such good digital channels, we're able to access people much more strategically with communications more befitting for them. So we realize that there are quick readers, potentially employees or general public who just want a high-level skim of information. They're not going to read a 95-page report, but they'll read a tweet, or they'll read some quick copy on a website in a carousel case. So what we're seeing is companies chopping up their sustainability discourse into 2 broad categories. The first is detailed data. The ESG raters, rankers, some of the NGOs, they want lots and lots of data. They're not too worried about the £500 you gave to charity or the £5 you raised in a bake sale. They don't want that, but they do want the hard numbers and the strategic outlook and then the processes and policies that you go through. So that's lots of numbers, lots of data, very limited on the narrative. The other side is the storytelling. People want to understand the company's role in the world, where they're going. They want it to be an easy read. They want it to be case study driven, narrative led, with a few facts and figures, you know, and how things align to things like SDGs. So these two camps, these sectors of stakeholder audiences are really starting to form, and we're working with a lot of our clients to provide information in those camps, and it really has become a bit of divergence between heavy data and story-led narratives. I think Dan will probably talk a bit about sort of some of the online capabilities here of how that information is conveyed.
Yeah, thanks, Lane. So I think interestingly here, some of the data is really showcasing, you know, the interactive tools that are increasing in terms of how, you know, users are kind of finding that data. And obviously then in terms of then sustainability specific news and obviously then alerts as well, we're seeing an increase year on year. So again, there's definitely a driver for, you know, people wanting to be able to stay up to date with the latest kind of content in terms of how that's working. So companies communicating their evolution over time in terms of how they're communicating with the different audiences. And then in terms of how that links to the reports themselves, so providing a link to a sustainability report, 75, you know, fairly kind of big number. Providing a download center and an archive, 63. But again, what we're seeing is a real transition, as Leighton kind of alluding to, in terms of their businesses using things like fact sheets, using ESG data in Excel, thinking about sustainability summary. So it's not just a link to a sustainability report that kind of tells the whole story now. There's a certain level of transparency that we're looking for, and obviously bringing all of those different kind of, you know, publications together, and that's what digital then helps us do in a really engaging way to help users find the right kind of content in the right way for their own requirements. And again, as Leighton alluded to, you know, we're seeing a lot of a shift in terms of people wanting kind of quick sound bites versus deeper level kind of data in terms of discovering what that means for the different audiences. Leighton, do you want to take us through just a couple of examples on the data sheet specifically?
Yeah, okay. So a couple that I like for slightly different reasons. Tesco's this year issued their suite of fact sheets, which they have one for each of their material issues, and then they have a general fact sheets for their approach to sustainability. As I mentioned earlier, this is the heavy lifting. This is where the process, the policies, and the hard data goes into. What that's meant is the sustainability report has been shrunk, and it's become a narrative document that tells a story. It's the language is a lot more pared back. It's a lot more readable. It makes reference to these data sheets, these fact sheets, where it needs to go and find more information. But basically, that becomes an editorial report. They've upped what goes on the website as well, where the really editorial engaging content is on the website, which is encouraging towards this digital first approach, which we'll be talking about shortly. The reason this works really well is the ESG scrapers and the sustainability experts on this call will understand those well. That is the MSCI and the Sustainalytics, the tools that go and get information from the documents you put into the public domain. They work really well in this format. They will grab the information from here, put it into their systems, and score you on what you disclose. But because you don't have to put too much TLC and writing and wordsmith into these, they are factual documents. The ESG rating agencies actually prefer this methodology. I know that Tesco's have had good feedback from the investor community as a result of going down this road. So again, as I was saying earlier, it really is this horses for courses, realizing that there's two sets of audiences, the storytellers and then the data people, and then moving towards that road. The reason I call Wreck It Up, a similar approach, but they've managed to go a step further and remove their sustainability report. So they no longer have a sustainability report. They have an excellent website. They report well on there. They have a very active social campaign, social media process with lots of campaigns and lots of contacts going through that, and very good data sheets that they call insight sheets that give the more granular data focused information. That has meant after a few years of moving towards that, they finally got rid of their sustainability report and don't have one. And that's something I think if you're doing it well, then you shouldn't need a sustainability report. The only thing I would add to that is I think the other thing you probably need is an integrated annual report. So the annual report should be the place where the joined up story of how the business embraces sustainability, how it creates value or preserves value across its value chain, that needs to be told well in the annual report for that to work. So a couple of companies that I like the approach they take.
Leighton, is that part of that theme then of basically everyone making sure that sustainability is a continuous thread through their overall corporate narrative and is integral to what they do?
Yeah, absolutely. And these two companies are really good examples of that. I mean, Reckitt especially, you know, their purpose is very much to help the planet through hygiene and health products. Tesco's, you know, feeding people where food is needed. So yes, it starts with a purpose, and that narrative weaves its way all the way through its corporate identity in essence.
Great, thanks. Dan, do you want to show some other examples in terms of what people are doing online?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So let's just go through a couple of these examples. So we're going to start with Kering as we kind of go through. So Kering, sustainability obviously focused in terms of on their page. So again, aligning with what we were talking about earlier, funnily enough, in terms of messages from the senior management, in terms of the importance. But what I'm here to talk around here is their environmental profit and loss. So beyond obviously the narrative and the roadmap in terms of what they're showcasing, interestingly, from their side of things, what they've done is they've created this EPL section in terms of, you know, showcasing what this means in terms of the profit and the loss as a business from a sustainability point of view. So again, showcasing their methodology, understanding what it is and why it's important, but discovering kind of then how that data manifests itself in terms of the methodology they're using to measure their environmental impact in terms of, you know, showcasing as a business what they're doing and how they're kind of supporting the decisions they're making. And again, you know, nice little interactive tools, and again with other industry peers in terms of what they're doing. So again, a really nice approach in terms of just showcasing the data in a slightly different way, using a little engaging kind of infographics and things. The next example I wanted to showcase to you was, again, just aligning with what we were discussing earlier, really, in terms of the, clicking on the wrong thing, the Tesco example. So here what we can see is really kind of understanding how users can then understand how the fact sheets are working. So thinking about from a sustainability point of view, obviously I can download a little helps plan, I've got sustainability news, all of those good things, but linking off from this is really then the ability then to drill down into kind of the more information in terms of this reporting hub. So there's obviously the reporting hub which sits there in terms of the different elements, and again I've got the kind of the fact sheets and everything else front and center in terms of how I'm finding the information. Interestingly, from their side, they've also got that within kind of some other areas of their site. So if we then start looking at, you know, how that navigates through in terms of a little helps plan, you can then find out more about the framework, how that relates to things like purpose as well, which I think is a really nice example of bringing all of those things together in terms of their KPIs and the summary beyond it. Rio Tinto sustainability section and their sustainability approach. I think this is, you know, a really nice kind of showcasing of obviously their kind of the reporting kind of thing that they're doing around the strategy, thinking about understanding what the audiences are looking for in terms of their strategic pillars, and then linking you off to more information. And again, the point with this is, I think, a really nice narrative as you scroll down the page, and then linking you off in terms of how that works from a reporting point of view. So as you're kind of immersing yourself in the information, finding out more about what the company does, I can then go through and find out more about the sustainability report and understanding obviously then how that fact book kind of works. So I've then got, you know, sustainability data using an Excel download, and beyond that, obviously then more of a narrative in terms of the framework and what they're doing. Now, really interestingly for me, and this sustainability reporting section actually sits within the investment section of the site. And I think that's just an interesting kind of conversation in terms of sustainability versus ESG. And again, we'll come on to that in a little while in terms of thinking about the audiences and obviously, you know, what they're requiring from the data that we're seeing. Two final examples. So Heineken, again, showcasing sustainability and responsibility on the page in terms of how they're kind of divesting in terms of the reporting side. Again, linking out to things like their SDGs, thinking about ESG in action, obviously showcasing the stories that align with it. And as I'm navigating through, you can then start to understand what their ambitions are, you know, backed up by a really nice kind of little video in terms of bringing that story to life, and then allowing you to then drill down in terms of, you know, the specifics around what they're doing. So again, aligning with that in terms of the progress, thinking about the reports, thinking about the data, and allowing you then to find out the relevant information as you kind of need, you know, link through. And if we then look at how that works from a navigation point of view, I'll just scroll back up. So thinking about how that works from the sustainability section, clicking on this in terms of then the separation between environmental, social, responsible and beyond, thinking about that progress, going into the reporting center, and again, finding out the relevant information in terms of them just being able to drill down and find, GRI reference tables, environmental data tables. So again, providing a real kind of smorgasbord of kind of different content. And the final thing is really around A, B, and B. So, materiality being the focus here on this page in terms of within the sustainability section. And they're just using a really nice interactive kind of, chart for this. So again, finding more information, being able to drill down. And again, it's something we don't see a lot of in terms of within sites, but I think it's a really nice example of how you can then showcase, obviously, not just the priorities, but linking again to that extra level of detail. And again, being a little bit critical, maybe you could then link through to see more around, human rights or what the business is doing around their social economic impact. But again, it's a really nice starting point in terms of how that relates.
Cool, thanks, Dan. That's great. Just before we kind of go on to the next bit, I've got a couple of questions I'd like to just hand on. I think first one is probably a reference around reporting, Leighton, which was a great question from Elsa, which is, about the importance of frameworks like GRI, in terms of using that as a kind of framework, if you like, for the sustainability report. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so in terms of reporting, GRI, incredibly important. I've worked with GRI for a long time, back when they first started, and what they aim to do to create that standardization of reporting, give guidance on what makes a good report, I think is incredibly important. It's not a particularly useful tool for storytelling and for positioning and for differentiation. That's not what it's aimed for. I guess the other thing with GRI is anybody who works in sustainability reporting now is so overwhelmed with a number of different frameworks and reporting indices, SASB, GRI, DGSI, CDP, and there's the big four that have come at the WEF set of indicators. There's just so much reporting that goes on, and that ultimately there's got to be some standardization, and that's starting to happen. But yeah, I think that GRI from a reporting perspective is an incredibly useful tool. And in GRI, it talks about materiality as well. It gives good guidance on how to do a materiality assessment, and the basis of GRI is to report aligned to your material issues, further reinforcing the importance of having a robust methodology for materiality.
Great, thanks, Leighton. Elsa, I hope that answers your question. Do come back if there's anything else you want to know on that. And James asked another question. Again, Leighton, it's probably more in your territory around, can you comment on external audit of ESG data? It probably follows on nicely from the previous question.
Yeah, personal view on the assurance process, the audit of external data is it doesn't really assure. It sort of says it says that it didn't find anything to worry about. It sort of says we did not find anything that's not worrying to not. It's not a very definitive statement, but maybe necessary evil is a bit unfair on it, but it's certainly something I think is quite necessary. The idea of adding robustness to your data, giving veracity to the data you report, is incredibly important. In fact, there's legislation being proposed in Europe at the moment to make some sustainability data mandatorily go through an assurance process, an audit process. So I think the idea is right, and I think the legislation is going to push it in that way. I just think the way it's currently done by the Big Four and others probably could be done better, but it's here to stay for sure.
Right.
It's also, I'll just add on that, it's also an incredibly expensive process, and there's different levels of assurance. You can just get a few data points assured, or you can get every word you write assured, where they'll start fact checking. If you say our people are our number one priority, they'll say prove it, prove it, prove it. So depending on the level of assurance, it can be very expensive and a very painstaking, time-consuming process.
Excellent, thanks. I think that probably leads, in terms of, I guess one of the big conversations we have with, various clients, client organizations and so on. I call it there's the big conversation because it's probably one of the things we get asked the most about, which is ESG, sustainability, how do they fit together? Where should they sit in the site? How do you better communicate it? Dan, do you want to just give some kind of top level stats on what we've seen in ESG first, and then maybe you and Leighton can have a bit of a conversation in the next few minutes around, how you see those two fitting together and how different companies are handling it.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So we presented this at our last event as well. And I think it's a really interesting kind of stat as to how the data has changed over the last few years. ESG in terms of within the IR section, so thinking about how it's communicating with investors, has increased from 13 in 2019 through to 34 last year, and is now on 41. And what that basically means is we've seen a myriad of different approaches for how companies are communicating it. Some are using it as a stepping stone within their investor section to showcase, sustainability content, so literally linking out to kind of other areas. And then the likes of BP and beyond are really kind of showcasing, ESG related content. They're actually going out and creating, relevant kind of, pieces of content that can be provided to different audiences. And through that, what we're seeing is then, supporting that with things like webcasts, presentations, and reports. And again, small numbers you'll see from the numbers on the bottom, 5%, 10%, etc. But again, the increase this year has seen webcast presentations and reports supporting ESG increase. And again, that aligns with our understanding that different audiences are requiring different types of content. And businesses are now being asked to kind of really understand how ESG fits within their sustainability framework. Now, interestingly, some organizations are using that ESG term interchangeably. Tends to be more financial organizations in our experience. And you've seen a few examples of those in terms of the examples I've shown you already today. But what's important for us is then understanding how ESG fits within the kind of the wider ecosystems and the strategic kind of communications of how that's brought together. And what you're seeing here is really kind of a three-stage kind of process. If you imagine it being linear over time, moving from left to right, whereby, you start with an annual report, sustainability report, as Leighton said, and that's evolved and changed over time to really kind of understand how then sustainability, progress reports and data policy supplements can then be intertwined. And then what we're seeing on the right-hand side is really where businesses are driving to. And Leighton mentioned it earlier that because digital now allows us to facilitate different requirements for users, actually that's being the main location for audiences in terms of the direction of travel of where they're going to find the information. And even if they're looking to download the annual report, they're still going to the website to get to it. But because there is a myriad of different kind of content there around things like ESG credentials and data and policy supplements and beyond, I think the real challenge over the next few years will be around findability, taxonomy, and understanding where users need to go to find the information. So how do you bring all of these strands together and let the stakeholders understand how as a business you're performing, and more importantly, understand what that means for them? Leighton, I don't know if you've got any views on that.
Yeah, I think, as you know, we get a lot of briefs in that say we're looking for a digital first approach. And sometimes that's reporting suites, sometimes that's websites, sometimes that's just in general on sustainability. And I think this graphic is probably one of the best ways I've seen to show what digital first really means. That they'll come to your website, whatever, and that's your point. You get to impress your key messaging upon them and to try and change the behaviors you want to change, whether it's information, education. That's your one point. From there, effective signposting can say, hey, if you want loads of really heavy data on climate scope 3 emissions, go over here because we've got that for you. But also, if you want to read about some of the great work we're doing with our teams, here it is as well. So I just see that the website has been this, when done well, has been this brilliant portal to identify the persona of the person visiting, figuring out what they need and getting them there very, very efficiently and quickly in a almost enjoyable but certainly pain-free way, which hasn't been the case for many years, where the website's become a bit of a dumping ground. People get there, do 3 clicks and give up. So I feel like now with good architecture, good messaging and good content, we're now able to get users to what they're looking for really quickly in an enjoyable way.
I guess, Leighton, let's address the elephant in the room in terms of should it be sustainability versus ESG? I mean, our opinion is very much based on our own experience in terms of best practice. There isn't really a mandate, is there, in terms of the requirements as to which way that the cookie crumbles on that?
No, and even you and I didn't fully agree when we were prepping for this. So it shows even
you weren't supposed to tell everyone, but yeah, no, it's fine.
I broadly, for me, the way it seems to have reduced to is financial companies, markets reporting, analysts tend to talk about ESG. Companies that are active agents on it, they're doing something about it, often talk about sustainability or corporate responsibility or sustainable development. ESG seems to be a bit of a more reporting, a sort of an inward out sharing information, whereas sustainability is more about the things you do. There's another elephant in the room of ESG, which is what does the G part really mean? governance in its widest sense covers an awful lot more than what typically ends up in the ESG realms, which is, you know, anti-corruption, ethics, and non-competition, bribery. That's pretty much makes it into sustainability type ESG. But, you know, audit, board effectiveness, remuneration, these are all things that are covered in the wider G. So there's that question as well. And of course, they're very important to analysts and investors. So I think 5 years ago, I used to say, oh, it's just semantics, isn't it? And now I'm starting to think it's actually a bit more than semantics, but I don't know exactly what it is. There is a difference. The analysts I talk to always talk, and the investors always talk about ESG. The people I speak to are writing policies and developing programs at FMCG companies, always talk about sustainability. I'm hoping as there's this convergence of all these frameworks and bodies trying to look for this single way of doing things, they'll address the sort of nomenclature and the terminology that we use in this world. If anyone in the audience has any views on this different, love to hear it. We spend a lot of time talking about it, thinking
Absolutely.
about it, stressing about it, so other views welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of help explain the element from myself, I always kind of equated the ESG being very much that financial lens from an audience point of view, which is why sitting within the investor section is actually kind of the preferred option from myself in terms of then understanding what those users are looking for versus, you know, Joe Public. And if you mentioned ESG to somebody as they're walking down the street, they'd probably ask you to repeat yourself and say, what was that? Whereas sustainability, responsibility, they'll understand that's climate change, they'll understand it's water use, and beyond that in terms of all the other elements you were mentioning there, Leighton. So I think it's all a real challenge to make sure that all the audiences adhere to where content fits, and obviously understanding how that then is brought to life as well.
Yeah, I think that probably leads a bit, doesn't it, Dan, to the you know, some of the findings or overall conclusions that we've had, and you know, a couple of questions that we've got, you know, that we're increasingly asking.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in summary, you know, there has been a great emphasis on digital comms and fundamentally, you know, investment over the past year. And sustainability and ESG is really kind of top of the tree in terms of understanding what, you know, users are looking for. And we've mentioned the kind of the themes around sustainability in terms of that narrative, the leadership kind of direction, and obviously then enhanced in reporting. But I think there's very much two kind of critical questions that we're asking ourselves in this webinar and beyond in terms of what that means for the corporate side.
Yeah, and I think that probably plays a bit to the ESG versus sustainability. And interestingly, you know, a question that Sally's asked around, you know, what does the future look like in terms of communicating sustainability with stakeholders, which we'll come into in a minute. But, you know, I think what we're seeing actually across both kind of corporate narrative, overall kind of corporate storytelling, plus sustainability is a much more integrated narrative through the website. And actually, you know, our little prediction is that we'll probably start to move away from the silos of investors and, you know, sustainability and so on, and talk much more about the overall process and value creation story of an organization. So perhaps less silos and more threaded narrative through the website. But we'll see if that little prediction comes through. But certainly, I think it's something that, you know, we're actively considering working through with our clients. You know, I guess the second question is then, of course, is more over to everybody in the audience, which is how well your site stacks up. So just to let you know, we do reviews of websites if you would like to, and also Leighton can add his credentials and so on to, you know, reviewing any of your sustainability communications assessments and so on. So do reach out after the session with any follow-up you'd like us to do, or if you'd like us to share some of the in-depth nuggets that we have. But just before we close in the last kind of couple of minutes, I just want to pick up on Sal's questions. It's quite a nice one to kind of move towards the end of the session on, which is, you know, the future of sustainability comms with stakeholders, and also their fit with their overall communication. I mean, my perspective on that is that I think it'll become more proactive. So I think what we've seen in the past is more a library of content and information reports and kind of repository of info. I think now we're seeing kind of more active storytelling, focusing on the outcome, why things are important. And I think the next stage is then really proactively engaging with stakeholders, whether it be through kind of various digital channels as well as social, so make sure that people actually stay connected with the results and the outcomes. Leighton, Dan, what do you think?
So for me, I think two things. One is the active content versus passive is don't rely on people to come and find your website, find your report and read the 80th page to get it. If it's important, you've got to find a way to get it to them. And the digital world's set up for that through social media, through website, through campaigns. It's becoming more active and not relying on the user to do the work, but making sure you get your key messages over. So that's the first point. The second point for me is no greenwash, no bullshit. you've got to be honest. You've got to back up your claims with proof points. I spent a lot of my early career writing things like sustainability is at the heart of our strategy and our people are our number one asset. You just can't do that anymore and get away with it. You have to back it up with data, with proof, with case studies, with policies that support all that. So I think for me, and I believe there's legislation being looked at the moment that's going to actually, there certainly is in the EU taxonomies about how people refer to things as being sustainable. But even in general discourse, there's going to be an increased legislative focus on the claims people make in terms of sustainability and the veracity of those and the data to support them. So that's the two areas for me.
Yeah, and I think just chiming in on that, I think, understanding how the narrative of the sections work, and we do a lot of work in terms of landing pages to understand how we can bubble some of that content up in terms of making sure that we can think about what the different users are looking for. So it's not just good enough now to have a sustainability or a homepage landing page that has, click here to find out more. You've got to bring some of that data up in terms of showing that, casing that narrative. And Rich, I would align very much with your answer as well, thinking about personalization, thinking about how we can use technology, understanding what users are looking for to really kind of find out what's interesting for them. And I think that aligns very much again with what Leighton was saying there about the transparency as well, to make sure that you're showcasing the stories in the right way and in the right format.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. I think that's we've taken on all the questions. It's 4 minutes to go, but so I think for us, thank you for attending the session. As I say, we're very happy to share the slides with you afterwards. And just so you know, the next session that we're going to run is focused on careers, so that'll be a separate invitation. We know it's slightly different audience potentially, but that's on the 27th of July, so you're very welcome to that. There's a link there for the QR code to get you there. But as I say, thank you very much. Thanks, Leighton. Thanks, Dan. And thanks for attending our webinar. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.